Hello. Now, technically speaking, I shouldn't be this eager beaver. Everyone knows I love a good filter, so that's not going to change. The filter is here to stay. Hold on, can we see the fake eyelashes? I don't even know. But anyway, so I'm not meant to be super eager beaver, but I do like to be on time. So that's why I'm dialed in. I'm ready. This is like great, high constants, high who inspire. This is super exciting for me because today, truth be told, last week I didn't prepare as much as I should have. So that's my fault, right? And now this week I have come prepared because, of course, I'm sharing my opinion, but I want to do more than that. I'm hoping to be able to engage in a little bit of conversation, or at least a little bit of commentary, but also share a bit more, share a bit more depth, or at least I want to share a bit more depth. I think on live you only get half an hour anyway, but I don't want it to just be like a quick jump up and down, but rather let's go into it just a little bit. So what I've also realised is, bear with me 2 seconds, because I have things beeping in the background, which is never a good sign. So then I won't be able to hear anything properly. So let me now lock my computer screen. So today we are getting into What's Love Got to Do With It by Donna L. Franklin. And actually, this is definitely, and I'm going to actually, before I carry on, it's What's Love Got to Do With It? Understanding and Healing the Rift Between Black Men and Black Women. And the reason why I kind of wanted to read this or recommend this book is because it's not just about Black people in the sense of in relationships. There's so much more context to this book. There's so much more depth to this book that's applicable in any situation. And just to give more information, the reason why I even have this book is because at the time when I was running a dating agency, my focus really was around Black women and love. And I had a podcast called Black Female in Dating. And I just wanted to properly get into the psyche of our history and understanding what kind of issues Black men, Black women may or may not have. And if we do have them, what are they? Can we face them? Will we talk about them? And on my own personal discovery, it was also about really understanding. Now, this is going a little bit deeper here, but it was also about understanding the dynamic behind Black men, in some ways to understand a little bit more about my own dad. And this is, as I said, this is like very, very complicated, but this is definitely one of these books where, right now everyone's talking about racism and how to be an anti-racist, but there's so much within this book in terms of context that shouldn't be missed, that absolutely needs to be explored if you want to understand so much more around why we as Black people have to talk about being proud, what the issues are, why it's, people think about like it's coming up in October in the UK and then in February in the US. Why is Black History Month a thing? Now, outside and beyond the obvious reasons, if you want to read about anti-racism and you want to read about, I don't know, what's the one that I don't like? Robin DiAngelo, white fragility and all that kind of stuff, then in many ways you still have to read this, because this book sets the backdrop. Really, as a Black person you need to read it, as a non-Black person you need to read it, because it sets the backdrop to history to really kind of explain where we are. So like last time I didn't coast. Maybe I did a little bit. I coasted. I didn't go into detail, but today I feel it's necessary to kind of add a little bit more. So can you see all my notes? Can you see all of this? Well, they're not really notes. These are bookmarks because I couldn't find my tabs. My coloured tabs, which would have been great. Didn't work today. So I've got my little bookmarks. So I just want to kind of highlight some different things about this, because she's got some great titles, and this one is called The Past is Prologue: Slavery and Its Aftermath. And in many ways, when you kind of think about the archetype of the strong black woman, it comes from this. And it said that the matrifocality of slave families elevated the black woman to a position of greater responsibility, influence, and power within the family than that enjoyed by black men. One example of the slave woman's superior jurisdiction over the family was that although the slave master had the authority to give permission for a female slave to marry, this authority fell to the bride's mother. These gender patterns ran counter to those in the dominant culture, as well as to the slave's own traditional values. Thus, it can be argued that the subsequent tension between black men and women can be directly linked to the man's quest to gain his legitimate place within his family and his community. And when you think about this in, in the wider context of just general patriarchal societies, this is a standout right here. And this is, in many ways the beginning of not just the disconnect between black men and black women, but I think in many ways this whole setup of slavery, a woman being responsible for the household, the family, and everything else, and also in many cases having more power, led to, as I said, to this trope around the strong black woman and not being able to just be, not being able to be seen as vulnerable because you were given power, authority outside of what other, let's say, cultures actually had. So that was like one thing. So this section is called The Roots of Black Gender Conflict. And I think it kind of also plays into when we look at this part about today and talking about the particular intersection that black women sit. There we go. I don't know why my phone decided to shut off. This is also why we see the issues with many cases that black women aren't supported in many cases by a lot of people, but especially not black men, because there is still this root of gender conflict, dignity. Oh, I'm back again. The need to assert masculinity and the need to kind of come ahead. So, there's as I said, this book has so much within it, and the book really brings us through the context of the issues to understand more. It's also understanding the roots of, I think her name is, I've got the book somewhere. I hope it's right, Mickey Kendall, who wrote Hood Feminism. And the reason why she wrote that was also because feminism didn't do it, just similarly as civil rights didn't do. Feminism and civil rights focused on reasserting black male dominance and masculinity within society, and feminism focused on reasserting white women in society. But when you look back at it historically, and this is why history is always as important as the present, because when we talk about generational trauma, it's because you only know what your experiences have taught you, and those are the lessons, the life lessons you pass on to your kids. Those are the belief systems you pass on through generations. And when it came to the feelings historically between black and white women, they were always strained. And this part kind of says, not surprisingly, relationships between the two groups of women were strained. Antagonism existed for several reasons. First, white mistresses were dependent on the patriarchal system and consolidated their marginal social positions by denying the humanity of their female slaves. Second, if a white mistress suspected that a slave woman was sexually intimate with her husband, she could have her whipped, and many times there was no peace until the slave was sold. So it says white women may have been a subjugated class, but they saw no grounds for an alliance with black women on the basis of their gender. And interestingly enough, this part here was also raised, and I recently watched the Amend series with Will Smith, and this was the same issue that was raised, but these concepts, these historical concepts, are ever present. And in many cases, this concept here is also the reason why, on a personal level, I do what I do when it's talking about gender equality within the workplace, and also wanting companies to think about intersectionality and take action, is because very often women of color, black women, are left behind because there's only, there is a hierarchy, and the hierarchy started from this point in many ways. And this is what we have to ensure, that if we're going to focus on gender equality, we have to focus on all women, not just one particular group. But when you kind of understand when you understand this in the context of history, you see how it still plays out today. And then it carries on about the cult of true womanhood. It said all women were expected to defer to men, but for black women, deference was a racial imperative. Slavery and racism sought the emasculation of black women. Black people sought to counter such effects. Part of the responsibility of black men was to act like a man, and part of the responsibility of black women was to encourage and support the manhood of our men. Never intimidate him with her knowledge or common sense. Let him feel stable and dominant. So when I was going through this book, it was like, wow, 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 because we have to go into history. I think the initial quote in this book says, hold on, let me go back. If we do not know our history, we are doomed to live it as though it were our private fate. And that's it for me, really. Like, you have to learn so much. And this is why, for me, as I'm going through this series of books, as I still haven't picked, I'm not 100% sure as to what I'm reviewing next week, by the way. I'm still considering. It might be a finance book, it might be a communications book, a leadership book, I'm not sure. But everything that's happening right now, the foundations of this are here. And actually, when you read a book like this, it's not just about expressing love for another person. It's also about being able to love yourself. It's also about being able to understand, and this is irrespective of the color you are, but being able to understand, what are the issues that are holding me back? What are the things that I may have inherited as generational behaviors, as familial behaviors, that stop me from embracing myself as who I am, but also stops me from engaging within a relationship to the extent that I would like to the extent that I can actually give and also receive love. And this book really gets you thinking. It really kind of puts it all into perspective. And I think, any black woman reading this, and also, any woman of color reading this, will also think to themselves, there's so much to analyze in terms of our position within society, but understanding how this construct of our social value and social identity actually came to fruition. And in many cases, as I said, this goes back to so many things, but this one is particularly poignant. And this is called The Threat of the New Negro. And what it said is that in this point of change, that, the new Negro who had grown up in freedom and failed to show submissiveness was in many ways criminalized, but also in many ways described as being something horrific. And I think, like, right now, something similar is happening in terms of people are becoming more aware, people are changing, and things aren't the same way they were. But this, as I said, like, there's so much to get into it. It's not all, I found different excerpts to read. It's not all negative, but it also brings it into the present. And it talks about, O.J. Simpson and how he managed to escape being convicted. And it says, you know, Simpson was the first black man to kill a white woman and get away with murder, or to get away with it. But it also kind of talks about the psychology of race. It talks about the psychology of protecting one's own. And it really kind of brought home how much, I don't know, like, this book is deep, and it's not a book that you can just, I think I read it really quickly at the time that I read it, but I read it several times because there's so much in it. It takes so much time that you could almost miss something. But it says, like, this summary at the back, it says, you know, she provides an incisive and riveting analysis of the gender tensions that of the legacy of slavery and its aftermath. And it really is that. She cuts through so much, so articulately, so succinctly, and she gives you food for thought. And you know what, after breaking it down, and this is the beauty of this book, is that after breaking it down, she doesn't leave you kind of like feeling heavy, feeling low, feeling, you know, what's the word, depleted. It gives you a lot to think about. You definitely have to chew the fat, but she comes to the most important point, which is the path to healing, because this is what it's all about. You know, there's no point in sitting purely in, I would say, in negativity and going, you know, this has happened. There has to be a solution, an outcome, a change. And she brings that nicely together. You know, she talks about how we can make the changes, and when you kind of look at this, and as I said, it's not just applicable in terms of, well, I don't think it's purely applicable in terms of relationships, because it's so much to do with identity that when you look at, I don't know, fathers, uncles, whatever, you realize I'm not going to say that they are purely they're only a byproduct of this, but you see how necessary it is for us to do the work, how necessary it is for us to be able to recognize the signs. And this is why this book for me is one of those important ones, because for those of us who want to learn more, for those of us who want to really dig deeper, for those of us that want to even understand our generational issues, this book is it, because it provides the backdrop and context. And you know, as I've been talking recently, like recording podcasts, getting ready for Black History Month and all this kind of stuff, it really made me think about, like, why am I doing Black and Bookish? And the reason I'm doing it is to shed light and share inspiration, but also to bring the completeness of my own experiences and views to the world and share it, to say, you know, there's so much negative stuff going on in the world. And I'm not saying books should only be escapist, because, you know, I will be reviewing some romance books as well, ladies and gentlemen. That's coming too. But it's also to help find, you know, that kind of education. Find the books that might not always be on the bestseller lists. Find those books that are really enriching. They might be heavy to read to some extent, but, you know, the last sentence here on the back of the book says, the challenge of mending the rift between Black men and women is formidable, but can be made easier. Understanding is the first step on the path to healing. And she didn't necessarily mean love relationships. I mean, as in, like, sexual relationships. You know, she also meant just the general path. And I just think it's a wonderful, wonderful book. And I think it goes so far to explaining so much of what is missing in some of the conversations. It brings that extra level of depth. It brings that extra level of context to understand how much the trajectory of Black people has been changed over the years due to being enslaved for centuries, and moving forward. So like that's just my little short review today. But as I said, like each week I'm going to get better, because each week I'm going to decide even more like what I'm going to read, how much I'm going to read. But I'm hoping that as the weeks go by that you're watching and you're not necessarily shy anymore. And you ask questions maybe, or I know it's not always easy. As I said, it won't always be black authors, it won't always be black books, but the first two have just happened to be the case. If anybody also wants to suggest books for me to read and review, I'm also open to that. I'm having a little look at my bookcase right now to actually, I know exactly what book I'm going to review next week. I've got to look at the name properly. So, I've got to confess this. My secret obsession one of my secret obsessions, I'm guessing you guys are guessing that like I like history a little bit. One of my secret obsessions has always been the aristocracy. I've always wanted to understand how it worked. I wanted to understand how has it been, especially, and when I say aristocracy, I mean the British aristocracy. How has it been possible that the richest families in the 13th century, the richest 12 families are still the same richest 12 families today? How is it that we have managed to kind of skirt so many of the topics around the aristocracy without really kind of going underneath the bonnet, as it were? So next week, my book is going to be entitled by Chris Bryant, and it goes in like literally. This book is, I think, about 500 pages or something. I've got to double check, but I will talk about that. If anyone has any other suggestions, let me know. But that's definitely a book we have to talk about, because that one is no. I'm not doing another review. I've got to zip up, right? So, entitled Chris Bryant. I will take a picture. I was going to say I don't think I'm decent, but I am. Hold that thought. Let me go get the book. Right, here it is. So, entitled Chris Bryant, A Critical History of the British Aristocracy. I can't say anything more because I feel like I'll give away my opinion. How many pages is it? Without the bibliography, it is... Okay, it wasn't 500. It's like 350 pages without the bibliography. So this is coming up next week. I'm enjoying going through my bookcase because actually, when you remember a book, but then you kind of have to find yourself going back through it because you're going to talk about it. And there's so many things, and you read a book once or twice, or in my case, sometimes 3 times. And each time you read it, you get something else out of it. So I'm just going to see if there's a little summary at the front, a short one. Oh yeah, it says here, the full shocking story of the British aristocracy from Anglo-Saxon times until the UK. So it says, meticulously researched and engagingly written, entitled tells a riveting story of arrogance, corruption and greed, the defining characteristics of the British ruling class. And this isn't to say that I'm an anti-monarchist. I'm genuinely neutral, but yes, this is going to be it, just because I find it fascinating. So I think I only get 30 minutes on a live anyway. Is that right? I don't really know anymore. I know it used to be 30 minutes, but I think my time is up. If anybody wants to say anything, let me know. I'm looking. I can see I'm so what's the word? I'm so not over. It says you're watching, but then I'm like, are you is anyone really watching? I think it says you are, but I'm not totally sure. Alas, tune in next week with yours truly for Black and Bookish. And kind of, I think also this is a little bit of a, now you can probably almost see my brain through my scalp. This is probably a little insight into this brain of mine and the kind of things I read and the kind of things I like, but I like sharing. So, Thank you for staying with me at 8:25 UK time, 9:25 Munich time or German time. And I wish you all a wonderful, wonderful evening. What's left? Toodles!